Lucy Steinberg, 9 years old, entered the ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel in Manhattan with dirty clothes and worn-out shoes, dragging a tattered backpack that contained everything she owned in the world. The billionaire guests looked at her with disgust as she timidly approached the $2 million Steinway grand piano at the center of the hall. Security was about to throw her out when she whispered with a trembling voice, "Can I play something in exchange for a sandwich?" Cruel laughter filled the ballroom, a street kid claiming she could play that musical masterpiece. But when her small fingers touched the keys and she began playing Chopin's Fantaisie-Impromptu with a perfection that left everyone breathless, no one knew they were witnessing the return of the daughter of Maestro Alexander Steinberg, legendary pianist who died 3 years earlier. A child who had escaped from foster homes and lived on the streets, hiding a talent that would forever change their lives. Lucy Steinberg had no clear memories of when her life was normal. What she knew for certain was that 3 years earlier, when she was only 6 years old, her father, Alexander Steinberg, America's most celebrated pianist, had died in a car crash while returning from a concert at Carnegie Hall. Her mother had died of cancer when she was barely 4, leaving her completely alone in the world. Social services had taken her to a foster home in Queens, a gray and cold place where children were numbers, and where nobody believed that a street kid could really be the daughter of the great Maestro Steinberg. The documents had been lost in a municipal archive fire. There were no living relatives who could recognize her, and she was too young and traumatized to explain who she really was. At the foster home, Lucy had tried to tell them about the shiny black piano she had at home, about the evenings when Daddy taught her to play, about the melodies she still heard in her head. But the staff thought these were fantasies of a traumatized child who invented a better life to cope with the reality of abandonment. At 8, Lucy escaped from the foster home for the first time. She couldn't stand the screaming of other children, the bad food, the complete absence of music. She was caught and brought back 3 times, but on the 4th escape, she managed to disappear completely into the maze of New York streets, becoming invisible among the homeless and forgotten children who survived on the margins of the Big Apple. For a full year, she had lived by making do however she could, sleeping in subway stations when it was cold, begging outside churches, rummaging through dumpsters behind restaurants to find food scraps. But music had never abandoned her. Every time she saw a piano, in shopping malls, hotels, conservatories, she felt her fingers tingle, as if they wanted to remember what it meant to create beauty. The night before her encounter with destiny at the Grand Plaza Hotel, Lucy had slept on a bench in Central Park. It was November. It was cold, and she hadn't eaten in 2 days. She had heard about the charity gala being held at the hotel, an event to raise funds for unfortunate children. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was exactly the type of child they were raising money for, but no one would recognize her. She had approached the hotel with the only hope of asking for some food, but when she entered the main ballroom and saw the magnificent piano at the center of the hall, something inside her awakened. It was identical to the one her father played during rehearsals at home, the same Steinway & Sons model she had caressed thousands of times as a little girl. The guests were all in tuxedos and evening gowns, jewelry sparkling under crystal chandeliers, sophisticated conversations in different languages. She was a dirty stain among so much elegance, but she couldn't take her eyes off the piano. It was like seeing an old friend after years of separation. Hotel security was already moving to escort her out when Lucy found the courage to ask the question that would change her life. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the elegant ballroom it resonated like a cry. "Can I play something in exchange for a sandwich?" The laughter that followed was cruel. A street kid claiming she could play a $2 million instrument? It was ridiculous, pathetic, almost offensive to the sophisticated guests who were there for charity, but didn't want to deal directly with the poverty they were theoretically helping. But Marcus Williams, famous music manager and event organizer, had an idea. Why not let the kid make a fool of herself in front of everyone? It would be a fun moment, an anecdote to tell at cocktail parties for months to come. He gestured for security to stop and announced loudly, "Fine, little girl, show us what you can do. But if it's just noise, you leave immediately." Lucy approached the piano, with her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands were dirty, her nails uncut for weeks, clothes that smelled of street and desperation. But when she sat on the bench and her fingers touched the keys, everything changed. The first note of Chopin's Fantaisie-Impromptu resonated in the ballroom with crystalline purity that instantly silenced every conversation. The laughter died out. Sarcastic smiles transformed into expressions of disbelief. Lucy wasn't just playing the notes, she was living them. Every technical passage executed with perfection that even the professional pianists present recognized as extraordinary. But what left everyone breathless wasn't just the impeccable technique of a 9-year-old child, it was the pure emotion she transmitted through the music, a depth of feeling that spoke of losses too great for her age, of loneliness no child should ever know, of beauty that survived despite everything. When the last chord died away in the absolute silence of the ballroom, guests remained motionless for long seconds. Then someone began to applaud, and within moments the entire hall exploded in an ovation that never seemed to end. Lucy looked up from the piano, and for the first time in 3 years saw in adults' eyes not pity or annoyance, but wonder and respect. But what she didn't know was that among the audience was Sarah Martinez, music critic for the New York Times and close friend of the late Alexander Steinberg. Sarah had immediately recognized not only the extraordinary talent, but also something familiar in the way those small hands moved on the keys. It was the same delicate but powerful touch she had seen thousands of times when Alexander played. And when Lucy raised her face, Sarah saw in the child's eyes the same intense and melancholic gaze of her old friend. Destiny had just begun weaving the thread that would bring Lucy Steinberg back to her rightful place in the music world. But first, she had to face the truth about who she really was and what had happened to her family. Sarah Martinez remained seated at her table long after other guests had left the ballroom, watching Lucy, who had been taken to a hotel suite by the manager himself, still shocked by the performance he had witnessed. The music critic had covered Alexander Steinberg's career for over 20 years, had seen his daughter born and grow, had cried at her funeral when she was presumed dead along with her father. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Lucy's gestures at the piano, the way she tilted her head when facing difficult passages, the particular pedaling technique that Alexander had developed and that no other school taught. They couldn't be coincidences. But how was it possible that the daughter of America's most famous maestro had been living on the streets for 3 years without anyone noticing? The next morning, Sarah began her research. What she discovered shocked her. After Alexander's death, Lucy had effectively disappeared from official records. Social services had a file for Lucy No Last Name, an unidentified child found traumatized at the accident scene and hospitalized for weeks. In the municipal archive file, all documents that could connect that child to the Steinberg family had been lost. The foster home where she had been taken had records of a child who said she was the daughter of a famous pianist, but staff had cataloged those claims as post-traumatic fantasies. No one had ever made the connection with Alexander Steinberg, also because, officially, his daughter had died in the accident with him. A bureaucratic error that had condemned a child to 3 years of social invisibility. Sarah rushed to the hotel and asked to speak with Lucy. She found her in the suite, washed and dressed in clean clothes the hotel staff had provided, but still visibly scared and distrustful. When Sarah told her she had been her father's friend, Lucy's eyes filled with tears she hadn't shed in years. Lucy began telling her true story for the first time since the accident happened. She remembered the night of the accident. Daddy had to go to Boston for a concert. She was supposed to stay home with the babysitter, but at the last moment, the woman got sick. Alexander had decided to bring Lucy with him, promising that after the concert, they would go get ice cream at a place he knew near the theater. The return trip had been happy. Alexander had played magnificently. Lucy had applauded from the audience, feeling like the proudest child in the world. In the car, they sang together songs he had taught her. Then there was the terrible noise, the world spinning, darkness, and when she woke up in the hospital, everyone said Daddy was dead, and no one seemed to know who she was. Sarah listened with a broken heart as Lucy told her about the 3 years that followed. The foster home where no one believed her stories, the escape to New York streets, hunger, cold, constant fear, but above all, the music that had kept her alive. She had continued practicing in her mind the lessons Daddy had taught her, had played imaginary pianos with her fingers when she couldn't sleep, had hummed softly the melodies that were the only remaining link to her previous life. The definitive confirmation came when Sarah asked Lucy to play something that no one could know, unless they truly belonged to the Steinberg family. Lucy sat at the suite's piano and played a simple but deeply moving melody. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was the lullaby that Alexander had composed for his wife when Lucy was a newborn, a piece never published, never performed publicly, that existed only in private recordings Sarah had heard at the maestro's home years before. There were no more doubts. Lucy Steinberg, daughter of the piano legend, was alive.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
But now, Sarah had to face an even more complex issue: how to reintegrate a traumatized child who had grown up on the streets into the sophisticated world of classical music, and how to manage the media impact of a discovery that would shake the entire international music scene. The first step was contacting the lawyer who had managed Alexander's estate. Officially, all of the maestro's assets had been placed in a trust fund, awaiting possible heirs. The family mansion in the Hamptons had been sealed, Alexander's famous piano had been transferred to storage, his sheet music and private recordings had been preserved in a bank. If Lucy were legally recognized as his daughter, she would inherit everything, a fortune estimated at over $20 million, plus an invaluable artistic heritage. But legal recognition required time, documents, DNA tests, and meanwhile, Lucy needed stability, medical care, psychological support, and above all, to return to the music that had been her salvation. Sarah made a decision that would change both their lives. She brought Lucy to her home and began the long process of rebuilding an identity and a future. The first thing they did together was buy a piano. When Lucy saw it being brought into Sarah's apartment, she burst into tears. They weren't tears of sadness, but of pure joy. For the first time in 3 years, she had an instrument of her own again, a way to give voice to the feelings she had kept locked inside for too long. That evening, Lucy played for hours, her hands regaining agility and confidence with each piece. Sarah listened from the kitchen, knowing she was witnessing something miraculous. Not just the return of an extraordinary talent, but the rebirth of a child who had found her way back home. News that Lucy Steinberg was alive exploded in international media. Sarah managed the revelation carefully. First, the DNA tests that confirmed identity, then a press conference that shocked the classical music world. Discovering that the great Alexander's daughter had inherited his extraordinary talent was like finding a lost treasure. Offers came immediately: prestigious conservatories, record labels, promoters willing to pay astronomical figures. But Sarah was determined to protect Lucy from commercial frenzy. The child needed time to recover emotionally and socially, with enormous educational gaps, and the need to learn to trust adults again. The chosen teacher was Viktor Petrov, legendary Russian instructor. When he heard a recording of Lucy, he immediately changed his mind about refusing her as a student. The first meeting was emotional. After hearing the child play, he told her that in 60 years he had never heard such pure talent, but enormous work would be needed to rebuild the technique. The family mansion was reopened. Lucy entered after 3 years with joy and pain. Everything had remained the same, but now it was home where she could start dreaming again. The first public concert, after 6 months, was an intimate recital that included pieces by her father and the lullaby dedicated to her departed parents. The performance was a triumph that transformed her from a frightened child into a young artist capable of honoring her father's memory. 2 years after her rediscovery, Lucy had to balance worldwide fame with the need to develop her own artistic identity. She began composing personal melodies that mixed the classical elegance inherited from her father with modern influences derived from her street experiences. The breakthrough came with a benefit concert for New York street children. Lucy interrupted the performance to tell her story with surprising maturity, talking about fear and hunger, but also about how music had saved her. The concert raised over $2 million to build 3 shelters. Lucy then decided to meet the children from the foster home she had escaped from. She organized a concert for them, brought musical instruments, and above all, her testimony of hope. With the funds raised, she financed more accurate family search programs and art classes, transforming the place of her suffering into opportunities for others. At 14, Lucy had become a symbol of resilience and voice for the forgotten. She had developed her own unique style while keeping her father's legacy alive. Her first major composition was Streets of Memory, a suite that musically told her journey from loss to rebirth, premiered at Lincoln Center. The most ambitious project was the Alexander Steinberg School, a conservatory for children from difficult situations. Lucy personally conducted auditions in foster homes and shelters, looking for that emotional spark she had recognized in herself. After 2 years, the school's youth orchestra won national competitions, but the real success was measured in changed lives. At her 18th birthday, Lucy celebrated with a concert where all her students played together. She thanked Sarah, Victor, and her kids, but dedicated the most important moment to her father's memory, saying that every note played was a way to keep him alive and thank him for the gift that had saved her. 10 years after that night at the Grand Plaza Hotel, Lucy Steinberg was 25 and recognized as one of the most influential musicians of her generation. But her impact went far beyond piano technique or critically acclaimed compositions. She had proven that art could be a force for social change, that talent could emerge anywhere, and that compassion was as important as competence. The Alexander Steinberg School had become an international model. Delegations from around the world came to study her teaching method, which combined artistic excellence with social inclusion. Many of her first students were now professional musicians. Some had created their own schools following her example. Others worked as music therapists or specialized educators. Sarah, now 60, continued being Lucy's manager and maternal figure, but more as an advisor than protector. Lucy had learned to navigate alone in the complex world of professional music, always maintaining the values that had guided her since childhood. Victor, now 80, had retired from active teaching but remained Lucy's most trusted artistic advisor. Lucy's most ambitious project to celebrate the 10th anniversary of her rebirth was a worldwide concert streamed online where hundreds of her former students played simultaneously from 50 different cities. It was a tribute to music as universal language, but also a demonstration of how an idea born from desperation could grow to touch lives worldwide. During the concert, Lucy told her story once more, but now with the perspective of maturity. She spoke of how pain could become compassion, how loss could teach the value of what you have, how music could be not just entertainment, but medicine for the soul. Her voice was steady, confident, that of a woman who had transformed personal tragedy into universal mission. But the most emotional moment was when she opened the piano that had belonged to her father and that she now kept in her private studio. She played the lullaby that Alexander had composed for his wife, the same one that had convinced Sarah of her true identity years before. But this time, it wasn't a melancholy memory. It was a celebration of love that continues beyond death, of music that connects generations, of talent transmitted not just through genes, but through values. At the concert's end, Lucy announced her most ambitious project, an international foundation that would create music schools for disadvantaged children worldwide. The goal was ambitious but clear: ensure that no child with musical talent would ever again be lost or forgotten, regardless of their origins or circumstances. The concert's closing ceremony was held symbolically at the Grand Plaza Hotel in New York, in the same ballroom where it all began. The Steinway piano was still there, polished to a mirror shine, and Lucy sat on the same bench where she had sat as a hungry and desperate child. But this time, she didn't play Chopin. She played an original composition she had written specifically for the occasion, titled The Child Who Dreams. It was a piece that spoke of hope, infinite possibilities, of how every ending can be a new beginning. The melody was simple enough for even a beginner to play, but deep enough to move the most experienced musicians. As the last notes resonated in the elegant ballroom, Lucy thought about the 9-year-old girl who had entered there 10 years before. That child had asked for a sandwich in exchange for music. Now the woman she had become offered music in exchange for a better world, where every child could discover and cultivate their talents. Lucy Steinberg's story had become legend, the lost child who found herself through music and now helped others do the same. But for her, it wasn't just a beautiful story to tell. It was living proof that no matter how dark the situation might seem, there's always a note of hope waiting to be played. And every time a child learned their first scale, every time a young person discovered they could create beauty with their own hands, every time music lit a spark in a lost soul, Lucy knew her father was smiling. Because music never dies, it transforms, grows, and continues to live in the heart of those who have the courage to share it. The piano fell silent, but the melody continued. It was the sound of the future being born from the past, the promise that every forgotten child could still become the symphony the world was waiting to hear. Like, if you believe every child deserves a chance to shine, comment, which moment touched your heart most in this story? Share to inspire those who never stopped dreaming, despite difficulties. Subscribe for more stories of hidden talents and impossible second chances. Sometimes the most precious diamonds are found in the most unexpected places. Sometimes just one right note can change a life forever. And sometimes music is the only language that can heal a broken heart. Because every child who dreams is a symphony waiting to be written.